Hello and welcome to Indus News, live from Islamabad. I am Munib Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. The Taliban have killed at least 17 soldiers during clashes in Afghanistan's northern Takhar province. A spokesman for the governor said 16 Taliban fighters were also killed during fighting in the Baharak and Khwaja Ghar districts. At least 20 people have reportedly been killed as soldiers opened fire on protesters in Nigeria's biggest city, Lagos. According to witnesses, 50 others are injured at a toll gate while protesting police brutality. Amnesty International says security forces used excessive force against the demonstrators. Authorities have imposed an indefinite 24-hour curfew on Lagos and other regions. The United Nations says warring sides in Libya have agreed to open land and air travel routes between their regions. At a news conference in Geneva, United Nations acting Libya envoy Stephanie Williams said the GNA and Eastern government have also agreed to avoid any military escalation. Williams said she is quite optimistic that talks between both sides will lead to a lasting ceasefire. News coming in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. The Taliban have killed at least 17 soldiers during clashes in Afghanistan's northern Takhar province. A spokesman for the governor confirmed the casualties in the Baharak and Khwaja Ghar district. He said 16 Taliban fighters were also killed during the clashes. Meanwhile, NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg said the Taliban must live up to their commitments and reduce violence for ceasefire. Stoltenberg was speaking ahead of a NATO defense ministerial meeting. He said they must break all ties with Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups and negotiate in good faith. Now, 15 people have died and over a dozen injured in a stampede in Afghanistan's eastern Nangarhar province. Officials say the stampede ensued after 3,000 Afghans gathered in Jalalabad city to apply for visas to Pakistan. They say the visa applicants jolted to secure their token from the consulate officials. They added that 11 of the victims were women. The officials say the injured include several senior citizens. Meanwhile, the Pakistani embassy in Afghanistan has expressed deep grief over the loss of lives. Moving on now, at least 20 people have reportedly been killed as soldiers opened fire on protesters in Nigeria's biggest city, Lagos. According to witnesses, 50 others are injured in Lekki district while protesting police brutality. Now, Amnesty International says security personnel used excessive force against the demonstrators. Authorities have imposed an indefinite 24-hour curfew on Lagos and other regions. Lagos State Governor says criminals have hijacked the protests to unleash mayhem. Protests over a now disbanded controversial police unit have been continuing for 2 weeks. The demonstrators call for more changes in the security forces as well as reforms to the way the country is run. Moving on now, Azerbaijan claims it has liberated the Cherekhen village in the Jabrayil region from the Armenian forces. President Ilham Aliyev says every day Azeri flag is raised over a new residential settlement. Aliyev tweets he is confident Azerbaijani citizens will return to all the lands liberated from Armenian occupation. The Defense Ministry says Azeri forces pacified multiple advances by Armenian troops towards Jabrayil and Gubadli region. The statement reads, Azeri forces have seized a large number of weapons and ammunition left behind. It says Armenian Chief of Artillery, Commander of the Artillery Division and Commander of a battalion were killed during the fighting. The ministry also claimed the Azeri forces have destroyed another drone belonging to the Armenian forces. Now, over 750 people have been killed in the fight, which started on the 27th of September. Now, the United Nations says warring sides in Libya have agreed to open land and air travel routes between their regions. United Nations Acting Libya Envoy Stephanie Williams said this at a news conference in Geneva. Williams said the GNA and Eastern government have also agreed to avoid any military escalation. The United Nations envoy said she is quite optimistic that talks between both sides will lead to a lasting ceasefire. She blamed foreign interference for intensifying the political crisis in Libya. She added the GNA and the Eastern government in Tobruk have agreed to avoid any military escalation. Williams asserted that the resignation of GNA chief al-Sarraj will lead towards democratic elections in the country. The UN envoy said talks between the Libyan rival factions will resume next Friday. Meanwhile, Israeli warplanes have carried out airstrikes on the central and southern parts of Gaza Strip. Israeli army said the strike was a response to a rocket fired from the Palestinian enclave towards Israel. Spokesperson Avishai Adrai said Israeli jets struck an underground facility allegedly belonging to Hamas. But witnesses stated only the agricultural land east of Deir al-Bala city in central Gaza was targeted with 3 missiles. There were no immediate reports of casualties. The raid was launched a few hours after Israel said it discovered a tunnel crossing from the Gaza Strip into Israel. Moving on, China, Russia and Iran have called for de-escalation of tensions in the Middle East. Addressing the United Nations Security Council's ministerial session on the Gulf region, the foreign ministers termed regional peace crucial for world peace. Now, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said respect for sovereignty of states in accordance with international law is necessary for peace. Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said the Middle Eastern nations have to decide between being prisoners of the past and a future of peace. He said the United States military buildup in the Gulf and arms sales have worsened regional security. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi proposed building a multilateral dialogue platform for the Gulf region. Wang said the platform will ease regional tensions, which is necessary to safeguard the Iran nuclear deal. Meanwhile, United Nations Human Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet says Indian laws suppress voices of civil society in the country. Bachelet said these laws are also being used to restrict foreign funding for non-governmental organizations in India. Now, in a statement, Bachelet appealed to the government of India to safeguard the rights of NGOs. She criticized the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act as vaguely worded one. Bachelet said it has been invoked to justify an array of highly intrusive measures. She urged New Delhi to release people charged under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. The United Nations executive said Indian authorities have arrested over 1,500 protesters for simply exercising basic human rights. Now, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says the country is headed towards economic recovery. The Prime Minister said the country recorded a current account surplus of $73 million in September. In a tweet, Prime Minister Imran Khan mentioned this raises the current account surplus of the first quarter of 2020 to $792 million. The country registered $1,492 million deficit for the same period last year. The Premier said Pakistan's exports grew by 29%, while remittances increased by 9% in the last month. Now, still in Pakistan, where the coronavirus has claimed 19 more lives, with the death toll rising to 6,692. The Health Ministry says 660 people tested positive for the virus in the past 24 hours. The ministry added there are over 9,000 active COVID-19 cases in the country. It said out of over 324,000 countrywide cases, more than 308,000 have recovered. The ministry said more than 142,000 cases have been detected in the Sindh province, while Punjab has reported around 101,000 cases, while in the capital, Islamabad, some 18,000 people have been infected. Now, India has reported 717 COVID-19 deaths and over 54,000 infections overnight, as the caseload has crossed 7.65 million. COVID-19 has claimed 661 more lives in Brazil, pushing the death toll to over 154,000, while globally the virus has claimed more than 1 million lives and infected over 40 million people. More details in this report.
After After weeks of rising cases and warnings in several regions, a second wave of the coronavirus has now firmly taken hold across much of the world. Europe continues to break records as Spain is set to become the first European nation with over 1 million infections. The number of hospitalizations doubling each week in Belgium. The government has ordered bars and restaurants to close. The United Kingdom has resorted to extraordinary measures in vaccine development as the island nation hit another record high in the daily COVID-19 infections. However, London's decision to deliberate infecting young volunteers to accelerate the development of a cure has raised concerns with the WHO.
What is critical is that if people are considering this, it must be overseen by an ethics committee, and the volunteers must have full consent, and they must select the volunteers in order to minimize their risk, because you will be challenging people with a virus that we do not have a treatment for.
In Latin America, the total number of infections has passed 10.5 million. Meanwhile, Russia has also reached yet another peak of single-day infections. But fresh restrictions to contain the outbreak in the virus hotspots haven't gone down well with the people.
I do not think lockdown will happen, to be frank. It wouldn't be beneficial for authorities. They will need to pay emergency allowance. Much cheaper if people stay home self-isolated. But I do not like that people can get beaten for not wearing masks in public.
Meanwhile, New Zealand is once again under the virus radar as 25 new cases were detected overnight.
Now, France is set to disband a Muslim organization following the beheading of a teacher who showed blasphemous cartoons to his pupils. The decision follows President Emmanuel Macron's pledge to introduce regressive measures that largely target Muslims. Now, Muslim activists have accused Macron of trying to repress Islam in the country. France has the largest Muslim population in Europe at around 5 million, mostly from North Africa. Now, European Union member states have reached an agreement to reform the common agricultural policy after 2 years of discussions. The European Council says the reforms place a greater focus on environmental protection. The talks concluded with an agreement following a proposal by German Agricultural Minister Julia Klöckner. Speaking at a press conference, Julia termed the agreement as a milestone. The proposal will extend a greater level of freedom to member states on how they achieve agreed upon goals. The bloc has set conservation of nature, environmental protection and ensuring food quality as the chief goals. The new reforms will come into effect in 2023 and include a 2-year learning period. More news coming up in this bulletin after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now, 5 people have been killed in an explosion in Karachi, city of Pakistan's southern Sindh province. Rescue officials say 20 others were wounded in the blast that occurred in a multi-story building. Windows of nearby buildings as well as some vehicles were shattered by the explosion. Police say the cause of the blast is not yet known. However, they said gas cylinder may be a cause of the explosion. Now, thousands take to the streets in Indonesia's capital, Jakarta, against President Joko Widodo's new jobs law. It's the latest in a series of rallies opposing legislation that the government says is needed to attract investment. Protesters, including students and labour groups, demanded the president to revoke the so-called omnibus bill. They say labour unions have already taken action to file a judicial review to the Constitutional Court. The government says the new law will lead to a widespread employment generation. But trade unions, students, academics and civil society groups say the legislation reduces protections for the workers. Moving on, the United Nations has lamented the slow pace of progress in women's rights globally. In the World's Women 2020 report, the United Nations warned of a further slowdown due to the coronavirus pandemic. The report revealed the situation has not improved in the last 25 years with respect to employment and domestic violence. It said COVID-19 lockdowns also increased the risk of domestic violence. It noted women were more likely to be infected from COVID-19 as they constitute 70% of the healthcare workers. Fewer than half of the world's women were employed in the paid labour market in comparison to 3/4 of men. Job market participation was particularly low in Asia and Africa, where rates fell below 30%. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said no country has achieved gender equality. Now, the death toll from Cambodia's flash floods has risen to 34. The National Committee for Disaster Management said it evacuated over 37,000 people. The committee added floods have damaged more than 73,000 houses. It mentioned that some 293,000 hectares of farmland have been submerged, affecting more than 300,000 people. It said seasonal rains coupled with tropical storms have inundated 19 out of 25 provinces in Cambodia. Now, Ethiopia is facing its worst locust invasion in 25 years. It has damaged an estimated 200,000 hectares of land there since January, threatening food supplies. More details in this report.
Locusts have invaded Ethiopia's farming land. A single square kilometer swarm can eat as much food in a day as 35,000 people, posing a risk to the livelihoods of millions. It is part of a once-in-a-lifetime succession of swarms that have plagued East Africa and the Red Sea region since late 2019. The coronavirus pandemic has exacerbated the crisis this year by disrupting the United Nations Food Agency's supply chain of pesticides.
My sorghum investment of 5 hectares of land was dropped by swarm of locusts. I have 7 children and 5 of them go to school. Will not be able to either feed them or send them to school after this nightmare.
However, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization says efforts are being made to fight the invasion.
We have quickly moved both government and FAO. Over the weekend, we already brought 2 air assets that are spraying as we speak. Over 100 field teams are on the ground doing both survey and control operation, and additional aircraft and helicopters are on the way between this week and next week.
Unusual weather patterns such as heavy rains and floods have worsened the latest swarms spreading across the country. If the crops are devoured, Ethiopia could have another humanitarian disaster on its hands. If the crops are devoured, Ethiopia could have another humanitarian disaster on its hands. According to the UN, the infestation will continue until 2021 in Ethiopia, and then the swarms will go to Kenya.
Now, in Egypt, archaeologists have discovered more than 80 coffins in the ancient necropolis of Saqqara. The 59 coffins were discovered in August at the UNESCO World Heritage Site south of Cairo. Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities Secretary General Mustafa al-Waziri said coffins are about 2,500 years old. Waziri said the coffins are in better condition than those previously discovered. The discovery showed finely painted sarcophagi as well as a collection of colored and gilded wooden statues. Now, NASA has made history by collecting its first ever sample from an asteroid over 100 million miles from Earth. Details in this report.
Asteroids are among the leftover debris from the solar system's formation some 4.5 billion years ago. Scientists believe asteroids and comets crashing into early Earth may have delivered organic compounds and water that seeded the planet for life. Atomic-level analysis of samples from Bennu asteroid could provide a key evidence to support that hypothesis. NASA launched its minivan-sized OSIRIS-REx spacecraft in 2016 from the Kennedy Space Center, the journey to Bennu.
It's just scientifically really exciting. It's the first time that we've, been to the surface, we tried to touch the surface of another solar system object. The first time that NASA has tried to do that and in order to bring back the sample, in a really long time. And the first time that NASA has tried to do it on an asteroid, there was a Japanese mission called Hayabusa that did something like this on a different type of asteroid a few years ago.
The spacecraft made a 4-hour descent towards the rugged surface of the celestial body to collect the sample. It could take up to 10 days to determine if the OSIRIS-REx has achieved its aim to collect at least 60 grams of dirt and gravel. The collected samples are scheduled to land on Earth, encased in a special return capsule in September 2023.
Well, Well, now the European Union says, deal or no deal, the United Kingdom must respect the withdrawal agreement. European Council Commission Vice President Maros Sefcovic says Brussels' objective is still to reach a post-Brexit trade deal. Addressing the Parliament, Sefcovic stated the EU is committed to reaching an agreement on all aspects of future ties with Britain, but he pointed out the two sides remain far apart on issues of fisheries and level playing field of fair competition. Sefcovic said both sides will continue to work for a fruitful relationship, but not at any price. Well, now the World Economic Forum has warned the rise of machines and automation will eliminate 85 million jobs by 2025. In a report, the forum says routine or manual jobs in administration and data processing are most at threat of the automation. It says the robot revolution will also create 97 million jobs worldwide, but put some communities at risk. The report adds new jobs will emerge in care, big data and the green economy. It warns workers now faced a double threat from accelerating automation and the fallout from the COVID-19 recession. It says these two things have deepened inequalities across labour markets and reversed gains in employment. Now, meanwhile, European stocks have slid as renewed optimism about stimulus talks in the United States failed to boost sentiment. Investors have taken a back seat amid new restrictions due to a second wave of COVID-19 in the region. Frankfurt's DAX has plummeted more than 1%. The pan-European stock 600 shed over 1%, with construction stocks falling nearly 2%. London's FTSE plunged over 1.5%, while Italy's FTSE MIB shed over 1%. In Paris, the CAC 40 slipped nearly 1.5%. Earlier, all Asian stocks edged up with the exception of mainland Chinese bourses. Well, with that, we come to the end of the news bulletin. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News. Take care.